Hello, everyone. Okay. Fourteen. So I'm waiting for the others to join in. Hopefully when they do, then we all start. Can you guys hear me? Okay, good. Again, let me know if it's clear. If it's not clear, I'll work on it. So let's give them some few minutes to join in, and hopefully. Okay. So I think we are almost set. Let me try and then see where to start. So from our last meeting, we did discuss the whole idea of the introduction. Today, what we have is the second chapter, which has to do with the GDP measurement. So you guys can keep track of what's going on. You can take notes, and I'll try and explain to you guys the outline, and we can start just after that. It seems like we have about 20 or so students. I'll try as much as possible to give them a minute or two to join. If not, I'll just start right away. So let's just give them some few minutes, and we'll join after that. So let me know if something is not clear. For the sake of trying to follow what's going on, I might have to elect one of you as a class rep for today. Let me know if someone might want to volunteer. If no one is willing to volunteer, I'll pick one at random. So let me see who I have here. Tanya, are you willing to volunteer for today as a class rep? Should someone ask a question on the chat box, you can let me know via the voice message, as well as if I ask a question, if everything is clear, just let me know via the voice message as well. I don't have the laptop here, it's off. Is that okay with you, Tanya? Is Tanya there? Manan? Manan? Hello, Manan?
Hey.
Yeah, I wanted to find out, are you willing to be the class rep for today? And if yes, you will just alert me if someone has a question on the chat box, and if I ask a question whether everything is clear, if you can respond back to me.
Sure, sounds good. Thank you.
No problem then. So for the sake of what we discussed last week, just to be consistent again, I did mention the fact that attendance is part of our grading scheme. And if someone should skip a class, the attendance will go against the person. And then the second most important thing is the recording wouldn't be made available unless you attended the lecture, right? So if you don't attend the lecture, the recording wouldn't be made available to you. Should you have an excuse for missing out, then you can email me, then I'll send you the lecture recording. And for the students in the class, if you happen to attend the lecture and you have the lecture video, you are not allowed to send it out to your colleague who hasn't, attended. The person can just contact me direct, and I can give the person the lecture video. The second thing is, for the sake of trying to get you guys to class as well, if the class attendance is reasonable, somewhere around 40 or above, then it implies that the participation is very high, which implies that all the work that you did before the midterm counts. And I will not be in a position to go and repeat your midterm questions in your finals. That is to say that your finals will just capture anything just after the midterm to the very last day. I will not start from the first lecture to the very last lecture. It wouldn't be comprehensive. But if the class attendance is not encouraging, then I wouldn't know whether we did follow what I discussed with you, and I'll be tempted to ask you guys everything from scratch till the very last day. So that is just a way of getting people to class. So to those of you who have been attending, keep coming. If you need the lecture videos, I'll give them to you, but don't send them out. If you send them out and the class participation is not high, then you have to sit for the entire comprehensive, question from the very first lecture to the last one. So that's an incentive for you not to send the lecture note out, the lecture video out, and get your colleagues to also participate as the lecture goes on. So that will be it for today in terms of the setting. In terms of what we have for today we are trying to measure GDP, trying to measure how a country is doing. What do we mean by GDP? What will be a definition of a GDP and what's not? So this will be our outline, and I will cancel it as soon as you have it. So in terms of GDP, what I would like you guys to know is you have to understand the time. In terms of defining what GDP is, you have to understand that for the definition of GDP, it contains a specific period of time. It's not as if you're interested in calculating it, it's almost every year. No, you have to specific in terms of the time. You also have to capture the idea that defining GDP of a country, which is the gross domestic product, it only entails the goods and services and nothing else. And lastly, you have to also bring in the idea of place or boundary. Whenever you are calculating GDP, you have to capture the fact that it's specific to a particular country or a particular place. So these are the three most important things that you have to capture whenever you are interested in defining what a GDP is. So in terms of defining it classically, GDP is basically the goods and services produced at a particular point in time at a particular place. That will suffice for the full mark in trying to define what GDP is. Now, the second thing we will be discussing today is the approaches to calculating GDP. That is the measurement of GDP. There are three ways to calculate GDP. We have the expenditure approach, we have the income approach, and then we have the product approach. These three approaches, the good news is that they all give you the same results, okay? So when I use expenditure approach, I should get the same results as an income approach or the product or value addition approach. These three will give you the same results. One thing I would like to point out here is that the most preferred way of calculating GDP, and then I'll come to that shortly after discussing everything, is the expenditure approach. With that, things are much easier for us to understand, and we can also clearly see the equation and what to put where. And moving forward to the later chapters, the expenditure approach might be the most preferred one. So keep that one in mind. Now, things to avoid whenever you are calculating GDP. Make sure you avoid double counting. You don't include a figure twice in GDP. So if, for instance, you've calculated the wage for someone, you don't have to come in and then bring in the same figure 2 times or 3 times. That's what we call double counting. So keep an eye on double counting. So when we start with today's calculation, you see what I'm talking about in terms of the double counting. Now, in terms of the key players in the economy, there are 3 most important players in every economy. We have the household, we have the firms, and then we have the government. These are the 3 things, 3 players in the economy. Today, we will talk about them briefly, and hopefully in the subsequent chapters, we'll see them play an important role, especially in the labor supply and labor demand market. These 2 guys are going to be very important. Now, as I started with today, we are trying as much as possible to define what a domestic product is, how good is the economy performing, and what's not. There is a limitation here with regards to using GDP, and the limitation is that GDP, even though it's a good measure for us to see what we are doing, sometimes it's not a good measure of welfare. It doesn't capture welfare properly for us. It doesn't tell us how good we are doing. This is due to the fact that some people within the economy might be producing or they might be transacting a business, but they are not willing to tell the government what they are doing. So the government will not be in a position to capture these figures. So there might be an underreporting. And due to this underreporting, we might not get the true picture of the economy. Also, there is an issue of extreme variables. Sometimes some individuals within the economy might hold almost all the wealth, all the money within the economy, and then the few people within the economy almost everyone will have 0, and only 1 or 2 people will have almost everything. And this will bias our results, and that's what they call the extreme variables. And that might underestimate the true nature of our GDP. So this might be 1 or 2 limitations in terms of welfare in measuring GDP. In terms of output measure, GDP as an output measure also has its own limitation. And it also has to do with the same underreporting. Some individuals within the economy might be transacting a business which might be illegal or underground or within the black market, and we cannot see what's going on. So GDP cannot get us that. And we end up underreporting it. And then the last part for today's discussion, in terms of the limitation with regards to measurement, is that GDP sometimes, by way of capturing the government expenditure, it doesn't do it really well. So these are the 2 most important things that you have to capture for the limitation. And lastly, in terms of the expenditure approach, as I pointed out here in measuring GDP, this expenditure approach, there are a couple of things that you need to understand. You need to understand what consumption is, what investment is, what government spending is, and what net export is, and how these variables affect the economy, both in the short run and in the long run. So this will be the outline for the first part of today's discussion. If you have any question on the outline, please let me know. Is there anyone in the chat room with a question? Manan?
I don't see any questions, Professor.
Okay, no problem then. If you have a question yourself, just let me know.
Sure, sir. Sounds good.
So if this is clear, then I can clean it and we start with today's discussion. First thing first, I posted a couple of figures on the Canvas page. Did you guys see it?
Yes, we did. Yes,
Yeah,
we got the email.
Yeah, so that's figures are the ones that we're gonna be using. So if you have the book, that's fine. You might not need the figures, but if you don't have the book, then it will be a good way for you to have a look at it. Actually, I'll advise everyone to have a look at the file, the first one, so that we all follow us in what we are doing. So I'll just start right away in terms of calculating GDP. So for the definition of what a GDP is, we've already captured it. Basically, goods and services produced in a given time at a given place. As simple as that. So here, we start with the approaches to measuring GDP. So let's get the files ready, and I'll start with it right away. Let me send out a link to a colleague of yours very quickly. So I'll be there soon, Manan. I'm going to send a link to a colleague. He's asking for the link, so let me send it out and I'll join you guys.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. Okay. So I think we all have the figures now. So let's try and see what to do there. I'll start with the expenditure approach, and hopefully that might be much clearer. So here, this is what we have. Yeah. So trying to read the story behind all the figures in the book. I'm just trying to use the figures to make things easier. So when you read the book, you get a better understanding of what's going on. Let's see what we have. And hopefully this might be much easier. So as I pointed out, I'll start by looking at the expenditure approach. So the expenditure approach is like this. So this is the
Professor, we have a question.
Yes, please.
The question is it recommended to read the book before lecture or afterwards?
Both. Both.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think I pointed out to you guys before the close of last week's this Tuesday's meeting that we're gonna go through chapter 2, and someone even emailed me as to what to read and what's not. So I really advise that you guys read before coming.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So this is the expenditure approach to computing GDP. And the reason why I prefer this method first is it has a systematic way of looking at the variables in the question. Basically, it says that for you to compute GDP, you need to check out for all the consumptions in the economy. Then check out for the fact that are there any investments in the economy? If you find any, put it there. Then check for any government spending in the economy. If there is any government spending, put it there. Then check for the fact that are there any exports in the economy? If there is any, put, and check for the fact that are there any imports in the economy? If there is any, put it there. So these are the variables that will help you compute what a GDP is using the expenditure approach. So this guy here basically says that I'm looking for all the consumption. How much did people consume in the economy given the period in time? So when I read the question, I'm always looking for C. How much is the consumption? How much is the consumption? This guy here basically talks about investment. How much did people invest in the economy? How much did they produce such that they didn't consume it, but they are trying to put it to the next year? So that's what they call investment, right? Even though you have the goods, you are not willing to consume it now. You are willing to push it to the next year. So that's what we call an investment. This guy here is also an expenditure, and we call it, Preston?
No, Professor. Somebody just joined in and their video is on.
Oh, okay. So
yep, now everything is okay. Thank you.
So this is the government spending, and we call it government spending or government expenditure. The government in the economy is such that it always takes away taxes from us. But whenever it takes away the taxes from us, it tends to put it somewhere useful, like build bridges, build hospitals, provide lights and whatnot. So that's what they call an expenditure. So that's also captured here. This guy here is export. Basically, what you have within your economy, you try and then sell it outside of your boundary. And this guy here is what we call an import. Whatever you have in an economy, if you try and then put it out. And the difference between these two guys, E minus X is what they call the net export. The E minus X is what they call the net export. But one thing I would like you guys to also pay attention to is that this guy, which is the difference between these two, which is the net export, is always equal to 0 whenever the economy is closed. What do I mean by that? An economy is called a closed economy when the economy is not willing to trade with anyone at all. No one comes into the economy to sell, and they also don't go out to sell anything outside of their economy. You can give an example like North Korea. Because of the sanctions, they don't sell anything outside of their economy, and people are not allowed to sell something to them. So when you have a closed economy, then the expenditure approach just becomes C plus I plus G. Okay, if you have any questions on this formula, please let me know. So this will be the expenditure approach. These are the variables that we are interested in capturing. As soon as we capture them, we are done in computing what the expenditure approach is. Okay. So if everyone is okay with this,
no questions.
Good. Is it clear from your end? Can you guys see?
Yeah, perfectly fine.
Okay, good. Now let's try and then start right away by looking at the question. Let's look at C. Now, if we read the book and then the chapter I provided, we are interested in computing this GDP, which is C plus I plus G plus exports. minus import. From the table, what happens to be the consumption in the economy? Is there anyone to help us with it? What is the consumption in there? How much did consumers consume in the economy? Sorry, I didn't inform you guys beforehand, even though I tried doing it in an optional manner. So you might not be used to the figures in the book. So maybe when you go back and read it, you tend to understand it much better. So I will just go along and then give you guys the figures.
Okay.
From the book and from the figures that I gave you, the story is that we have someone who produces coconut. He produced 20 million coconuts, and that's what you find on the first A part of it. He produces, I believe, 20 million coconuts, and out of the coconut that he produces, he gave 12 million of it to restaurants, and he gave 8 million to consumers. So at that point in time, from the first part of the question, you can clearly see that there is a consumer who consumed what? 8 million. Right? So that's the first part of it. We now have the consumption playing a role. But if you read the question further, you tend to see that this is not the only consumption in the economy. There is B part of it as well. The B part of it also says that there is someone in the economy who we call a restaurant. Now, this restaurant bought 12 million coconuts from the coconut producer. And out of this 12 million, the restaurant produced 30 million food for consumption. So we now have 30 million being produced by the restaurant. So restaurants gave us 30 million for consumption, whilst the coconut producer gave us 8 million. So at the end of the day, the total consumption in the economy happens to be 38 million. Is it clear? All good?
All good, no questions by now.
Okay. So that's the first part of the question. Now, the second part of the equation is we have to go in and look for investments. For the first example that the book gave, Jane has a question. Do you mind reading it?
So would the 12 million bought by the restaurant count as investment?
No, that's a good question. So let me quickly explain what an investment is. Investment is basically what you produced, okay? But given you produced it this year, maybe 2020, but you didn't consume it this year. You send it to the next year, like you working and getting paid. You are paid $100,000, and you said that I'm going to put this $100,000 in my investment. What does that mean? You are basically telling your friend that you are not going to spend this $100,000 this year. You're going to keep it for the subsequent years. So anything that is not consumed in this current economy is deemed as investment. If you look at the 12 million was given to the restaurant, right? And the restaurant then used that 12 million to produce and generate a revenue of 30 million. So the restaurant basically bought the 12 million within the same year, and it's consumed it by way of producing it for the consumers to consume. Is that clear? What's the question?
There is one more question. It says, but is the 12 million coconut used for future production?
It's used for current production for the restaurants, guys. Right? So remember, we have 3 different stages. I have a producer who produces the coconut. Then I have the restaurant who buys the coconut, and I have the government, right? The producer produced the coconut in this year. Okay. The restaurant went to the producer to buy the coconut, which is 12 million. And at the end of the day, use that 12 million coconuts to produce 30 million worth of food. And that 30 million was consumed by everybody. So if you had to go back to the restaurant and ask the restaurant, hey, where is the 12 million coconut that you bought? He will tell you that, hey, I used it this year, right? I use it to produce food. So that's not an investment. If I'm to go to him and ask him, where is the 12 million coconut that you had? And he said, hey, I have it saved. Then that will be an investment.
Okay.
Yeah. So because he used that 12 million to produce this 30 million, then that will be considered as today's consumption, but not an investment. So the investment is zero. For this economy, we don't have investment for the first part of the question. Now the government, did the government consume anything? Did the government provide, yeah? Is there a question?
Yes, so the restaurant buying 12 million coconut will not count as consuming, or this will be double counting.
It wouldn't be, yeah. Let me be specific. We have major issues with double counting when we use the other approaches. And that's the reason why I don't want to start with the value addition approach or the income approach. Expenditure approach is much easier for us to see. Expenditure approach basically says that go through the economy, find out the goods that were consumed within the same year, put them down. Find out the goods that were produced within the same year, but were not consumed and left for the next year. Is there any good in the question that was produced within the same year, but wasn't consumed and left for the following year in the question? Is there any good like that? I don't think so, right?
I don't see it, no.
Exactly. The 12 million was produced in this year, and it was transferred to the restaurant in this same year, and the restaurant cooked it within the same year, and people consumed it within the same year. Right? So this guy is basically zero. So the investment is not there. Is it okay? So now in terms of the government.
One more question, Professor. So so it will be just counting the final sale, but not the sale in between the firms.
For which one?
It would be for the restaurant.
For the restaurant, right? So what I would like you guys to pay attention here is the expenditure approach is much easier to work with because you know the variables to look out for, okay? There is no double counting in terms of the consumption. There is no double counting in terms of the investment. There's no double counting in terms of government. I'm just looking for what is the figure reported for the government spending. As soon as they give me that figure, I put it there. I'm looking for what is the consumption figure, give it to me in the economy. I go and I pick and I put it there. You see issues with double counting when we go, major issues with double counting when we use the value addition and the income approach, which I'll come and explain much further. For now, just think of the expenditure approach as much precise, much clear, and I'm just tackling the figures that has been given to me.
Okay.
Yeah. So we'll see much of the double counting much later, and I'll look at them pretty shortly as soon as we are done with this guy. So government spending, what is the government spending in the economy? What is the figure given to us? Anyone to help us? What is the government spending?
5 million?
Yeah, so it's supposed to be 5.5. Yeah, it's supposed to be 5.5, but Manan, the figure I sent first was wrong. So I tried sending you guys a new one. So it's 5.5, right? So that's my bad. I sent 2 double files for that. So just keep in mind. So it's supposed to be 5.5 for this guy because the government gave a security, which is more or less like the expenditure that they produce, right? So this is their expenditure in terms of the security that they provided for the coconut. So that
the question is, the government is just government spending.
Yeah, just government spending. Okay. Yeah. No taxes. Remember, taxes are not expenditure. Taxes are not cost to the government. Taxes are revenue to the government. but expenditure is what they use the tax for. So for this question, they use the tax to provide us security. So this security is what we call government spending.
Okay.
Is there anyone with any question again? All good?
No, I don't see any questions. All good.
Good. Now, this last part, you tend to see that the economy, there wasn't any selling outside of the economy, and there wasn't any buying inside of the economy. Do you guys get it? So this guy here, for the first part of the question, this guy is going to be 0. So for the first part of the question, this guy is going to be 0.
Okay.
Good. So this guy is just basically going to be 0 for the first part. So this is what we have. So at the end of the day, the expenditure approach is going to give us 43.5 million. So let me stop here. Those who had the problem with the double counting in the expenditure approach, if you still have some confusion in there, or if you need clarification, draw my attention. I can give you guys additional minutes in explaining the double counting here. So if you read the story, just to reiterate what we have in the question, let me give you guys the story again. I have 3 players in the economy, 3 or 4. I have a producer who produces coconut. I have a restaurant which sells coconut as well. I have government, and I have consumers. This approach says that go inside the economy, find out how much consumption were there. So when you read the question critically, you realize that out of the 20 million coconuts that was produced, 8 million of the coconut was consumed right away. 8 million was consumed right away. So that will be my first part of C. What happened? So remember, we had 20 million produced. Out of this 20 million, 8 million was produced right away. And I have 12 million that was kept. Now, this 12 million was sold to the restaurant. After the restaurant received this 12 million, it turned this 12 million to 30 million. After turning it to 30 million, it then sold it to consumers. So how much, So how much will the consumers consume then from the restaurants? How much will they consume?
Okay, so the question was so what we factor into consumption is the final value of what is purchased, which is why we count the 30 million and not the 12 million. Is that correct?
Yeah, the final value of what was given out. Remember, when the restaurant went to the producer to buy the coconut, the restaurant buyer didn't just go there to buy the 12 million coconut and put it straight out into his mouth, right? He took the 12 million, he brought it to his restaurant, cut the coconut into pieces such that he was able to make 30 million from that 12 million. And he sold that 30 million value to consumers. So that 30 million, as you guys rightly pointed out, is the final value that he had from the coconut. And that was the final value that was consumed. So that should be the value that we should consider and not the 12 million.
Okay. And there's also one more question. It says, where can we see the figure for G?
For G, what's G?
G will be the government expenditure for 5.5 million.
5.5, yeah, so that's the security that the government gave out, right? The government comes to you and then goes like, hey, you guys should pay me taxes. And you go like, hey, what are you going to use the taxes for? And the government goes like, I'm going to use the taxes to pay the military so that they can guide us, secure us from any enemy or any invader. So that expenditure is a 5.5 because the government is using that one to give you security.
Okay.
So if you look at the question, you tend to see that the government provided a security of 5.5 million.
5.5. Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Is there anyone with any question again?
No more questions.
Good. Now let's
just as everybody understands.
Okay, good. Now let's go to the second part of the question. I initially wanted to do the value addition approach before the income approach and go back and look at additions to it. But given that we are here, why not update this question? So the textbook updated the question in such a way that it's now including investment. So when you read the question again, I'm going to use the same approach to answer the same question that the textbook gave, but here it's included investments. So let's try and do that again. Let me read the investment part so that we all be clear on that. So if you go to page, if you go to page 37, you tend to see that there is an investment part of it that is going to play a role. Remember, the definition of investment is anything that you produce, but you end up not consuming it, but rather leaving it for the next year. That's considered as an investment. Is that okay with everyone? So this guy here, this is the new dimension that we need to take in terms of investment. It says that we now have here says that we now have that. Suppose in our example everything is identical as above, we've not changed anything yet, except that the coconut producer now produces 13 million coconuts instead of 10. Okay, and the extra 3 million coconuts are not sold out but stored as an inventory. So what will be the investment now? He has all in all, he has, the producer is here. He produces 13 million and he sells $2 for each. So he has 26 million in all. Out of this 13 million from question 1, we know what he used the 10 million for. That is, he consumed 8 and he gave the restaurant 12. And for this question, he now has extra 3, and this extra 3 each sells for $2. So he has 6 in all. Out of this 6, he's not consuming it. He's storing it for next year. And the fact that he's storing it is going to be an investment for him, because he's not consuming it in this current year. So we now have an I, which is supposed to be 6. Is that okay?
Yeah, everything good?
Good. So here, for this question, everything remains the same. We still have 38 million here, but the investment here, which means he didn't consume that extra, means this guy is going to be 6. This guy is going to be the same 5.5, and this guy is going to be 0. Is that clear?
Yes, no questions by now.
Good. Now let's do the same thing again, but here we are going to deal with the example where you have international trade, and that's where you have the whole idea that you now can sell to the rest of the world. Okay, you can now sell to the rest of the world. So for that, I'll keep it safe somewhere, and I'll go back and do the same thing for the income approach and expenditure approach and see whether we have the same results. So what did we get for the income, for the expenditure approach? For the first one, what was the value? Anyone? Was it 43 million?
43.5 million.
Yeah, and for the second one, when there was investment, what was the value for the expenditure approach?
It was 44.
Was it 44?
No, 49.5.
49.5. Okay. So let's keep it somewhere. This is what we had under the expenditure approach. I'm now going to go through the income approach and the value addition approach and see whether we can get the same result from each and every one of them. So draw my attention if everything is okay. So let's start with the income approach and let's see whether it will give us the same result. Now for the income approach, remember, what do we call an income? Everyone has what an income means to him or her. As part of the things that we call income are wages. Wages are clearly income to us, okay? We have taxes. Taxes are clearly income, but to the government, because that's the only way the government can get money. So that's the income to the government.
Okay.
We have interest rates. For instance, I lend something out and someone pays something to me, the interest on it. Interest on any investment or whatnot. I call that thing an income as well.
Okay.
Right? So, and one of the most important things here is the profit, the overall profit that comes from you working. That is also called an income. So whenever you have a question and the question is interested in finding out what is the GDP of the economy using the income approach, these are the key variables that your eyes has to constantly be on.
Okay. So the question is, the income will include both consumer and the government?
Yes, yes. The government has what it calls income, which is the taxes that it takes away from us.
Okay.
The consumer also has what he calls income, which is the amount of wage that is being paid to him. And remember, again, let me quickly point out something. Remember, the players in the economy. Remember, we have three players in the economy, three main players in the economy. They all have their respective incomes and their respective expenditures. We have the producers or the household. We have the household. We have the firms or the producers. And we have the government. These are the three players in the economy. These guys here, they have their income, which is basically the wage that is being paid to them and what's not. At the same time, they have their expenditure, which is basically the amount of money that they pay for consumption. Right? This is their income, which is wage and what's not, and this is their consumption, their expenditure, which is consumption. Firms also have the same thing. Firms might also have their income. Their income might be the profit that they get from operating. But at the same time, they have their expenditure, maybe their investment expenditure. So this might also be their expenditure. So their expenditure, which is E, is investment, while their income, which is I, is their profit. The same thing also applies to government. Government also has its own income, which is the taxes that it takes away from us, because it gets the money by taking up taxes. At the same time, government has its own expenditure, which is the G, like building, roads, providing security, and whatnot. So when we talk about income, you have to think about all the players in the economy. What are their income? what will be the income for firm, what will be the income for government, what will be the income for the household. If you are able to identify all these three, then you can calculate the income approach to GDP.
Okay.
Is that
The
fair?
question, one of the questions is economic agents involved in production. So that means that government produces military in this example, right?
Yeah, military expenditure. But if you read the question critically, you realize that the book was even hesitant to call that expenditure, but he said that's the way to go with it. To those who read the book, you realize that he was a bit hesitant in providing the expenditure as the government expenditure.
Okay.
Right.
And one more question is, so the interest paid can be considered as which part of income?
It will be like more or less like your investment income. For instance, you gave the bank $100 and the bank has promised to give you 10% every year. This is an income to you, right?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's the income to the household for lending out your money.
Okay, no more questions. Thank you.
So these are the variables that we need to keep in mind. So let's try and solve for the first part of the question, the income approach. So I'm going to put the income approach answers here. We're going to start with the A. What was the wages paid to the workers? Anyone to help me? Remember the wages that were paid to the workers.
5 million?
5 million?
Yeah, but do we have to add the coconut farm or restaurant and government?
Yeah, that's a good question. We need to add everything.
Okay.
Wages was paid.
15.5 then?
Restaurant hires you to come work for him or her, the restaurant will have to pay you wages. So the restaurant will pay wages. Remember that when the government hires you to come and work for him as a military guy, the government will have to pay you wages. So that will also be here. Remember, the coconut producer also hires farmers to come in and work for him on your field. He also has to pay wages. So that will be here. So we have three players playing a role here. We have the wages that was paid to the military guys. How much did they receive in terms of wages?
5.5.
How much did they receive in terms of working for the restaurant?
4 million.
Was it 4?
Yes.
How much did they receive in terms of working for the
coconut farmer, right?
Ali?
It would be 5 million.
5 million. So all in all, the total wages in the economy is going to be 14.5. Oh that is the total wages that was given to the guys in the economy. Is that okay with everyone? Is that okay?
Yeah, everyone is okay.
Now let's go here. In terms of taxes, this is where you might find it a bit difficult. So I'll put it somewhere safe. I'll move on to the interest rate and the profit, and I'll come back to taxes. How much was paid in terms of interest? I think that was just straightforward. Was 0.5?
0.5, yes.
Yeah, good. How much was paid was the final output in terms of profit for the firms? Restaurants, I think they had, how much did they receive, the restaurants?
Restaurant was 4 million in profits.
Was it 4 million or?
No, it says import with no change to revenue.
I think the restaurants, so if you go back to page, let me quickly, page 34, the restaurants receive 11 million, right?
Okay.
The restaurants receive 11 million, whilst the coconut producer received 13 million as profit, right? So we have this guy here, we have this guy here, we have this guy here. Remember, we are targeting A to be the same as the value that we had for the expenditure approach, which is 43. Let's try and add everything, leave away the taxes, and let's see what the value will be. How much will this guy be? So anyone can quickly report the figure. It's not supposed to be Manan only. Anyone can report the figure, and I'll just put it here. Add everything apart from the taxes, and let's see what the outcome is going to be. Add everything apart from the taxes. What are we supposed to get?
Just a moment. 16.
16. Remember this.
No, it's not going to be 16. Somebody responded 16.
24 plus 16, which is
40. No, it's 15. So 39.
39. Okay.
It will be 39. Yeah.
Okay, 39. And remember, we are targeting 43. So what is left to give us this 43? So 43.5 minus 39 will give us
4.5.
4.5, correct. So remember, as of this time, it's not only Manan. If you think you can also come in, you can come in. Okay, I think we are now more settled. Okay, so we have 4.5. Now the question here is, if you look at the question critically, how much was the taxes in the economy, the total taxes? It was 5.5, correct? Was it 5.5? Remember the taxes that was taken in the economy. The consumers paid $1 tax, whilst I believe the firms, both the restaurant and the producer, paid 4.5. But if you compute this, you realize that this guy is no more there. So if you read the question, you realize that both the restaurant plus the producers, when you add the two, you have 4.5 in taxes, which is the same as this. But the question here is, we still have an additional tax from the consumers, which is 1. Why wasn't this 1 added here? Right? And this is the first place for you guys to see where double counting will be playing a role. Okay? This is where you'll be seeing the old idea of double counting. So here, the 1 is not included because the taxes are basically supposed to be the taxes from the producers. So we don't have to take the $1 into account. The wages that you receive as a worker, if we are to take away the taxes that they paid, then we can add that taxes here. But the fact that we are not taking away the taxes here means that we don't have to include it here. And that's how come we end up with the same value as we had earlier, 43.5. We've only considered the taxes from the firms and not the consumers to balance the income approach. Is there anyone with any question as of now?
No, everything is good.
Now let's do the same thing. Nothing has changed, but here we are going to include the whole idea of the investment. There has been an investment. Now the question here is, where should we put the investment? Should the investment be here? Should it be considered as an income, or should it be considered as an expenditure? Jane, you have a question? Yeah.
Why don't we count taxes on consumers?
That's a good question. Remember, the money that they receive from working, if this guy were to be the net wage, which is the difference between the wage that they receive minus the taxes that they paid, then we can include that value here. But here, this is their raw wage. No taxes was taken away from it. So if I'm to, the 1 is still here, it's still somewhere here, okay? That $1 is still somewhere here. Within this 14.5, the $1 is here because the wages here is their raw wage. It wasn't the net wage. If it happens to be a net wage, which is basically the difference between wages, so let me just point it out here. Wages can be in 2. You can have gross wage and net wage. Net wage is when you subtract taxes, minus taxes. gross wage, there is no taxes taken away from you. So for this wage that we are reporting here, this is their gross wage. No taxes was taken away from it. If we took the net wage, which means the taxes were taken away from them, then we have to come back here and report the taxes that were taken away from them, which is +1. But the fact that we are using this, which means we've not reported any tax, which is 0, means that we're not going to put any tax here as well, which is 0. It might be confusing, I understand that. So if you need further clarification, let me know. Yeah. A little bit confusing, yeah. Just make sure that the wages is the raw wage. No taxes was taken from it. So there's no, if the government wasn't able to take the taxes from you, how can the government come and report the taxes to us? But if the government was able to take the taxes away from you, then the government can come and report the taxes to us. Yeah. So if it happens to be a net wage, which means that taxes has been taken care of, then the government can come and report that value here. But for now, it wasn't reported, so there's no way we can have it.
Okay.
Unless, of course, we have any further questions, just let me know. Now, let's think about the investment part of it. For the investment, the same thing happens. Everything is much easier now for the investment. Investment is more or less like an income to you. You produce something, you didn't consume it, you are pushing it to the next year. You still have additional income for the upcoming year. Or you can think of it as any other way that works, fits better for you. So let me quickly update that value and let's put in the record here. So what was the investment figure again? Anyone to help me? Right? So this guy here, this is the profit that was reported, 11 million and 13 million, right? We are now going to include the investment. Remember, there is an investment of how much? How much was the investment? Anyone to help me?
6 million.
Million, right? And it was by who? Who had that investment value?
Coconut farmer.
Coconut farmer, right? So the coconut farmer now has an additional 6 million to his assets, right? This is part of his assets. He has 6 million coconuts sitting down there in the bank waiting for him. And that will be part of his profit. So his profit will now change from, what was his initial profit? Was it 11? Was the initial profit for the coconut seller 11? 13. Oh, it was a 13, okay. If its initial profit was 13, was it 13 or 11?
13.
13. Then this will now shoot up to 19. Right? He now has 19. So 11 plus 19 will now give me a new figure of
30.
No more 24. So 14.5 plus 4.5 plus 0.5 plus 30, how much will I get? What will be the value? Anyone to help me? Anyone? 30, yeah. Was it? Am I wrong?
Somebody said 30.
0, was it?
Yeah, 49.5.
Correct. So that's going to give me 49.5. So that's the same thing as what we saw in B using the expenditure approach. You tend to see that they all have the same results. No difference. 49.5. Is it clear with everyone?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Everyone seems to be okay.
If you have questions, shoot your questions. I'll come and discuss them. Let me quickly charge my phone and get it. Give me a minute to get the phone charged. Yeah. So after this income approach, I'm going to move to the expenditure approach. If you have questions, let me know before we move to expenditure approach. Okay.
No questions by now.
Okay then. Now let's go to the expenditure approach. No, let's go to the value addition approach. And this is where you have to be careful about double counting, especially with goods changing hands, okay? So we are now going to work our way to the expenditure approach. Find out, sorry, the value or product approach. Let's see whether we have the same results as this guy. So remember, for the value addition approach, this is what we have. We have the coconut farmer. Here, we are basically looking for any raw figure or any raw value that has been added value to, or anything that wasn't in existence and someone came and provided some value to it, okay? So let's start with the coconut farmer. The coconut farmer started with almost nothing, but he was able to produce how much? 20 million worth of coconuts. So that's part of it. There was nothing before the coconut. He was the first person to put a value up to 20 million in terms of getting the coconut. Is that clear, everyone? Then we'll move on to the second player. The second player here, and this is where it might be a bit tricky, is the restaurant. The restaurant added a value of 30 million, or it had a revenue of 30 million. Now the question here is, out of this 30 million, we know for sure that it took 12 million from the coconut producer. We know that there was already a 12 million that it took away from the producer. So it is almost certain that within this 13 million, there is already an existing value that has been in the economy. So there's a need for us to take away this value. If not, we will be in trouble, or we might be doing a double counting. So here, it should be 30 minus 12 to get the final value for us. So 30 minus 12 gives us how much? How much are we here?
18 million.
18, okay. 18 plus this guy, how much is it? 38, right?
Yeah.
We now have an additional guy here, which is the government, right? The government is playing a role. The government comes in, we had no security at all. Everybody can come into the economy and beat us up or steal our goods or do anything that he or she wants to do with us. But the government comes in and the government goes like, I'm going to give you guys security. So there's a value, which is in the form of a service. And how much was that security in terms of the numbers? 5.5, correct. So 5.5 plus 18 plus 20 gives us how much? How much are we supposed to get? So we have 20, 18,
46.5, yeah.
And 5.5. So this is going to give us 43.5, which is the same thing as what we had in A, correct? So
yeah.
As you can see, the expenditure approach is giving us the same value as the income approach, which is giving us the same value as the product approach. So regardless of which method you use, you're basically supposed to get the same results, no difference. Now let's bring in the whole idea of investment. There was an investment of how much? 6 million, correct? When investment came into the question, how much was it? Was it 6 million?
Yes, it was 6 million.
Right, and it was by?
A coconut farmer.
Right, so here, this guy here becomes 26. So 26 plus 18 plus 5.5. What are we supposed to get? Anyone to help us with the calculation? You can type it there. Let me see whether it's consistent. If not, we can go back and then solve it again. 49.5, correct. So we still have the same value as we had earlier. 49.5. So regardless of which method, you're supposed to get the same results, right? So regardless of which method, you're supposed to get the same results. So if you have any question, let me know. If there are no questions, let's quickly take a break, 5 minutes break, come back at 10:50 and start with the other parts of today's discussion. Your TA will be in there taking records, so just make sure you come back as well.
Okay, no questions.
Okay then. So you guys can take 5 minutes break. I'll be back and take you guys through the new idea.
Thank you.
Okay, is everyone back? Is it time? Let me know if it's time, then we can start.
The question is, why don't you use BB Collaborate Ultra?
I'm not very comfortable with that, and I prefer to go with the blackboard, given that, or the whiteboard, given that I can clearly go back and change things whenever there is a question. For the Ultra, I've seen how it works, but I'm not really comfortable with it. And again, hopefully I'm gonna be using a tablet soon, with the whiteboard and all that. So that might be equally better. Do you guys have a problem with seeing this? Is it not clear? If it's not clear, let me know.
No, it's perfectly clear.
Oh yeah, this is an improvise, right? So hopefully it works for now. And when I get the iPad and it works fine, then we just move away from the whiteboard and use the iPad as well. Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Okay then. Yeah. So if everyone is back, then we can quickly go ahead and talk about another way of measuring. Another approach to using GDP. So what's realized from the first part of today's discussion is that we've been able to tell what a GDP is, how a country is performing. Does it have a higher GDP or a lower GDP? How do we compute for this GDP? What are the limitations in using GDP and what's not? So that's the first part of it. Now, the next idea here is, which is the second part of today's discussion, is we are trying to understand how do we compare two economies? How do we compare economy one to economy two? How do we compare the performance within an economy, giving a year value to another year's value? So that's the whole idea here. In as much as we know what a GDP is, we can tell how we did from the previous year's value compared to this year's value. Before we do that, in trying to say we've done well or we've done not so well, there's a need for us to differentiate one or two things first. The first thing we need to capture here is what a nominal GDP is and what a real GDP is. A nominal GDP only takes care of prices, mostly takes care of how the prices has been changing over time. So when I live in an economy, an apple goes for $2 today, but tomorrow the price of the same apple goes for $5, then the GDP will be increased by the change in the price of the apple. And that's what we call a nominal GDP. Whenever the price changes, the GDP changes as well. So that's nominal changes, not necessarily anything that has to do with the quantity of apples in question. However, if you are interested in using real GDP, you are not interested in looking at how the prices are changing over time, but rather you are interested in finding out how has the quantity of apples been changing over time. That's what we call the real GDP. That gives you a true measure of what is in the economy in terms of the quantity. So there's a need for us to differentiate between nominal changes and real changes. Nominal changes, whenever price changes, the GDP changes. Real changes, whenever the quantity changes, then the GDP changes as well. So these are the two different things. And we'll look at a couple of examples there as well. Now, the question here is, how do we measure this nominal GDP and this real GDP, and what's the best approach? The good news here is, if I'm trying to compare two time periods, and I know that today's price was $100, but yesterday's price was $50, it will be unfair to me to use the nominal GDP because prices has changed. Meanwhile, the quantity has remained the same. So I work for a company, I produce one apple. The price of the apple was $1. So I was given a GDP of $1. You go to the same company today, you produce the same apple, one quantity of apple. However, the price of apple now happens to be $10. The question here is, you now have a GDP, a nominal GDP of $10, whilst I had a nominal GDP of $1. But we all produce the same quantity. Is it fair for you to say that you performed better than I did? No, because we all produce the same quantity. So using nominal GDP is very biased. So there's a need for us to pick up one specific time period, use that same time period's price to compare your action as against mine. And that's what we call base year. So if you decide to use last year's price to compare my action to yours, that's what they call the paché. If we decide to use the present year's prices to compare my action to yours, that's what they call the paché. Last year's value is last year's. And you can decide to combine the two, last year and the present year, find the average of the two, and that's what we call the chain method. Basically, find the average of both years, and you have the chain method. Is there anyone with any question? Questions, Manan?
No questions, sir.
Good. In terms of measuring GDP, there are two ways to measure GDP. You can use the GDP approach or GDP inflator, or you can use the CPI. This guy here is very restrictive. It basically comes to the people in the economy, ask them what are the main items that you buy within a given year, and it just takes away, it just sample those goods and put them in a basket, and that becomes more or less what they use in calculating the GDP. But for the real GDP, for the GDP deflator, it contains almost everything within the economy in trying to compute the GDP. So this guy is very limited. The CPI is very limited, while the GDP deflator is more representative of what's happening in the economy. So that's one thing you have to keep in mind. Now, there are a couple of problems in using GDP to tell whether someone is performing well or not in terms of the inflation rate for the government and what's not. So that we will come to, and you can read it in the book as well. So if everyone is okay with the setup, then I will urge you to go to Canvas and pick up part 2 of the figures, and let's start computing the values, and let's see whether they make sense or not. If you have the figures, let me know. Do you guys have the figure 2? And let's start computing the nominal GDP and real GDP. Do you guys have the figures? Let me know when you're ready.
Yeah, figures are on.
All good?
Yeah.
Good. So let's have a look at what we have over there. So we have the quantity given to us. So let's compute. I have year 1. I have year 2. For year 1, I know the quantity. So for the nominal GDP, it's just the price multiplied by the quantity. I sum them up. The price of year 1, the quantity in year 1, and off I go. So if you look at the question critically, what was the price of apples?
50.
We had 50 apples, and the price was how much?
1.
Plus, we also had
Oranges.
how many?
We have 100 oranges for 0.8.
0.8. So the nominal GDP for the given year is just going to be, I think I wrote it in there. How much did we get for it?
130.
130. Good. The same thing applies to year 2. The nominal GDP
is 292.
The same approach. So if someone is not clear as to how we computed the nominal GDP for the second year, let me know. It's just the same quantity and then the prices, and off we go. So that would be the nominal part of it, which is pretty much straightforward.
Everyone seems to be okay with it.
Good. Now let's go to the second part. We are now trying to compute the GDP, but here we are interested in the real GDP. And whenever you are interested in computing real GDP, you need to hold 1 year constant. You don't have to change that year's price. So let's assume the situation where we take last year's price as constant, which is the last price method. So we take last year's price, which is going to be year one's price, and that will be the year that we use in computing all. So here, for instance, what was the price of apples for last year? It was 1. What was the price for oranges? It was 0.8. Given that we are using year one's prices, I need to come back here and put 1 and 0.8 without changing it. Then I'll just come here, multiply it by the quantity, I end up with 130. So what you tend to see is that when I take a particular year's price, the nominal GDP will be the same as the real GDP. What happens here for the real GDP? Anyone to help me? What was the quantity of apples?
80.
80. What was the quantity of oranges?
120.
120. So what is it going to be? Anyone to help me?
It says 292.
292.
Sorry, 176. Because it says base year is 1.
176. Did we get 176, everyone? Did we get 176, everyone? Okay, good. So that will be 176. So what you see here is that the nominal GDP is different from the real GDP when we take year one using the last price method. Let's come again, do the same thing. But here we are going to use present year, which is year 2, which is going to be the Pache method. What was the price in this current year? Anyone to help me? What was the price of apple for the current year?
1.25.
1.25. What was the price of oranges?
1.6.
1.6. So I put the same thing here, 1.25 and 1.6. I don't change it because I'm keeping the same base year for the two of them. And I multiply them by their respective quantities, right? I multiply this guy by 50. I multiply this guy by 100. I multiply this guy by 8. I multiply this guy by 120. And that will be, so you end up with the same value as this, which is 292, which is the same as the nominal GDP when you use year 2. So that's one thing I would like you guys to pay attention to. When you use year 2's value as the base year, the nominal GDP will be the same as the real GDP. However, when you use year 1's base year, then the nominal GDP will not be the same as the real GDP. The same thing applies to year 1 as well. Is there anyone with any question? Questions?
Not yet, sir.
Okay. Last method, which is a chain method, I'll ask you guys to go read about it. The simplest approach is pick up the two prices, find the average, and that will be the average that you use for both years. Pick up the price of apple year 1 plus the price of apple year 2, divide them by 2, use it as the base year, and use it in computing. So the chain method is the best approach because it doesn't really bias your results. However, when you use the Pache method, what you realize is that this guy is over-bloated. When you use the Las Palles method, you realize that this guy's value is very down. Jen, what was your question again?
It was, will we use the geometric average method in this class?
You can use that method, or you can use the method in Jones. Jones is much easier. So go have a look at Jones. If you don't have it, let me know. I can take a picture and send it to you guys. Jones, instead of multiplying, they basically added, which is much easier to work with.
Okay. Please send us the picture of.
Okay. Let me show you guys very soon. Give me a minute, I'm coming this here.
Sorry, there's a question. It says P1 into P2 square, right?
G1 times G2, the square root of it.
Oh, okay, yeah.
This is the Jones method. Basically, what the Jones is trying to do is we are trying to find the average, right? I use Laspeyres method, which is this method. I find the growth rate. I use the Pache method. I find the growth rate. I just add the two of them instead of multiplying. I'm just adding. Do you get it? And I divide them by 2. Instead of using the whole square roots and being complicated, you can use this approach as well. Is that okay? Yeah, I'll do that. Okay, then I'll show you guys an example. Yeah, let's do it. So if everyone is okay with this, then let's please take up the examples that I gave. I wouldn't want to repeat myself in terms of the numbers. Pick up the table and let's do it together. Oh, shit. So the table, anyone to help me with the table, please? I send the table out. I might have some difficulty in here. So if you have the table, let me know. If you don't, let me know as well.
Is it the same table as the apple and oranges or a different one?
The same table, the same table. I'm going to use the same figures.
Sure, sure.
So give yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's start with the first approach. What is the growth? What is the real GDP growth rate when we use the Laspeyres method? Basically, the growth rate, which is given to us as G, is the current real GDP minus the previous GDP, real GDP, all divided by the previous real GDP, multiplied by 100. This is the standard method to calculate a growth rate. So whenever you are being given whenever I ask for a growth rate, this is the method. The current GDP, which is this current year's GDP, minus the previous year's GDP, divided by the previous year's GDP. Now the question here is, this G, the growth rate, it can be the growth rate when we use the Laspeyres method. So basically here, what I'm looking for is the current real GDP under the Laspeyres method minus the previous real GDP under the Laspeyres method all over the previous real GDP under the Laspeyres method. So that will be the first part of it. What was the current GDP? That is the GDP in year 2 when we use the Laspeyres method. Anyone to help me? What was the value?
What was it, the year 1 or year 2?
Year 2 is the current, right? Whenever I say current, current is year 2, and previous is year 1.
Okay.
Right? Previous is always year, the year before, current is the current year. What was the current year's value? Anyone to help?
176.
Was it 176, everyone? That was the current year's value when we used the Laspeyres method. What was the real GDP for the previous year, year 1? 130. 130. What is the growth rate? I'm going to use the values in the book right away. 0.35.
Okay.
Do you get it? So you tend to see that when you use the Laspeyres, the growth rate is higher, 0.35. Let's compute the same thing again for the Pache. What was the current GDP when I used the Pache method?
292.
92. For the previous?
222.5.
222.5. The previous 222.5. What will I get? 0.3. 1, 2. Correct? Did we get that? Is okay? Are we following? If we have any questions, please draw my attention. I can stop. Questions?
No questions yet.
Okay. So we now have the respective growth rates. And this is what I'm talking about. You can go with what Jones is doing. What Jones is doing here is you pick this guy plus this guy, you divide them by 2. You have the chain rates. So the chain rate will be the weighted or the chain method. When you go with Jones, it just becomes 0.354 plus 0.312 divided by 2. That will be the chain method under the Jones. So that's much easier. Instead of multiplying the 2 growth rates and finding the square root of them, you can do it this way. However, if you want to go with Williamson, the one we are using, then you do it this way. You multiply this 0.354 multiplied by 0.312, find the square root. So that will be the chain method. Compare the two. How different are they? What will the chain method and the Jones give you? Anyone to help me with that?
0.333.
0.333. What will be the method and the Williamson?
Sorry, I'm still calculating it.
Yeah, the book. It says 0.333. Right?
Yeah.
I guess those who have the book, you can see that it's 0.333, right? If it's not there, let me know. It's supposed to be on page 45. Are we there?
Sorry, I don't have the book and nobody's answering the chat.
Yeah, I don't know why. Are we there?
Yeah.
3, right? Yeah. So it should be the same thing. So Jones should give you the same results. Williamson should give you the same results as well. If you have questions, ask. Was it Alex? Have I answered your question? Alex?
No answer yet. Yeah, he'll be okay.
Okay then. So those are the 3 methods, and that's how to compute the 3 methods of computing GDP. If you are okay with that, then I will quickly rush to the GDP deflator, which is going to be very important as well. So as I pointed out in the beginning of class, this is going to be a theory course because it's intermediate theory. So just keep up with the math. It might sound a bit overwhelming, but just keep up with it.
I just have a question.
Yeah, sure, feel free.
So there's 4 methods, and 2 of them are both chain methods, one from Jones and one from Williamson.
Yeah.
So we need to know all 4, and like you would clarify which type of chain method you're looking for if you're asking us to calculate a chain method.
So for the chain method, so let's quickly roll back. So there are actually 3 methods: the last bias, the Pache, and then the chain method. For the chain method, when you are supposed to use that of Williamson, it might sound a bit complicated because you have to multiply the 2 of them and find the square roots. It might be the case that you don't have a calculator to do that. So if you are finding issues with that, then just go ahead and use the Jones method where you just add the 2 and you divide them. So they should all give you the same results.
Okay, so it doesn't matter. Within the chain method, we can use either one.
Either
okay,
works.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the last bias, I saw the question in there. Yeah, the last bias basically takes care of you using the base year as year 1. That's the last year. the previous year. Whilst the passé means you are going to use the present year as your base year. So keep that one in mind as well. All good? Okay, then let's quickly go ahead and then do the real GDP deflator, and we can call it a day. We have 10 minutes to finish it. So for the GDP deflator, this is the formula. GDP deflator. I think they have a full name for it. So just go back to the book and then find it there. So this is GDP price deflator. It's going to be the nominal all over the row, and I believe you multiply by 100, and that will be the GDP deflator. What this does is it helps you calculate the inflation rate. It helps you capture the inflation rate in the economy, how the economy is doing in terms of price changes over time. Okay, so this is what we have in terms of the nominal GDP and then the real GDP. So when you are if I ask you to compute the GDP deflator, a couple of things you need to understand. Which year are you going to use as your base year? So an example here is when you go to the notes, I'm quickly going to use one of the examples in page 46. The table is going to be very difficult to understand, so please bear with me on that. Make sure you ask questions when you have any. It's supposed to be table 2.11. It's a bit complicated, so take note of that and ask questions if you have any. Let's assume I'm interested in finding out what the GDP price deflator is for year 1 and for year 2. And these are the base years. I'm going to use the base year here to be year 1. So year 1 is going to be my base year, and I'm interested in calculating the GDP deflator. So this is going to be very simple, given the fact that we have the figures. What is the nominal GDP? What is the nominal GDP over the real GDP multiplied by 100? The nominal GDP for year 1 was how much? Anyone to help me? I believe 130, was it? When we use base year to be year 1.
Yes, it is 130.
For the real GDP, when we use base year to be year 1 as well?
176.
130 as well, right? The same 130.
Okay, yeah, year 1.
Same year, the same year. So at the end of the nominal GDP here divided by the real GDP, which is the GDP deflator, price deflator, is just going to be 100. What about this guy here? Year 2. What is the nominal GDP in year 2? 292, was it?
Yeah, 292.
What was the real GDP when I use year 1?
Year 1, 176.
176. I multiply by 100. What do I have? You want to help me?
2 divided.
Those in the chat room, if you have a calculator to help us out, let me know. And there might be a tendency to just switch on your Zoom and leave. That's okay. But just remember, your TA might be doing a couple of cold calls. If you're not there, then it means you get 0 for the attendance. So just keep that one in mind. Anyone to help us? What was the deflator for year 2?
165.9. Yeah.
Exactly. So this is going to be 165.9. Now the question here is, what will be the change in the price? What will be the change in the price? The change in the price, remember the formula is going to be the current minus the previous, all of the previous, multiplied by 100. So the current value is 165.9 minus the previous year's deflator, which is 100, divided by 100, which gives me what? 65%. So that will be the inflation rate from year 1 to year 2, if and only if we go with the last Payes method. If we stick with the last Payes method, then we end up with this figure. Do we get it? So this is how to understand table 2.11. However, if we stick with the Pache method, which is the base year being year 2, then this guy is going to be nominal divided by the real. Year 2, nominal is going to be 292, real is going to be 292 as well, right? Multiplied by 100. What will be the nominal value for year 1? The same 130. What will be the real value for year 1 when we are using
2.5?
how much?
222.5.
2.5. So what will be the final value here? Anyone to help me? 130 divided by 222.5.
58.42.
How much?
58.42.
58.42. So what will be the change? Remember, the change is the current, which is 100, minus the previous, which is 58.42 divided by 58.42. What will be the change then? Anyone to help me?
71.17.
Exactly, 71.17. So this will be the percentage change in terms of inflation. And I will leave the chain method for you guys to go in and work it out. Is it okay with everyone? Is it clear enough? Okay. So this is how to calculate the GDP deflator. This is how to compute the changes in the prices and whatnot. The chain method follows the same approach. Try it out. If you have issues with it, just let me know. And the last part of it will be all about the reading and understanding how inflation works. So that will be everything about chapter 2 for now, and hopefully I can do chapter 4 and 5 the following week. Alex, you have a question?
Yes, it says, can I ask weighted chain method? We just calculate the growth rate.
Yeah.
How to calculate real GDP in each year?
Oh yeah. Do you guys have time? Please give me 5 minutes and let me take you guys through that. Okay.
Sure.
I know the time is up, but just give me 5 minutes to answer that question. So if I know the growth rate, yeah, that's a good question. It's also in the book. So what was the growth rate under the weighted average? What did he give us? I believe it gave us 0.33%, right? This is the growth rate that we have in the economy, right? 0.33%.
Yes.
How do I know what was the value, or what is the value in the coming year? There are a couple of ways of going about it. Let's imagine that I only know that the growth rate is 0.33, and I know the GDP last year was 130. I know GDP last year was 130. I know the growth rate is 33% every year. The question here is, if last year is 130 and I know every year the GDP will grow by 33%, then it's just going to be that value, which is 130, multiplied by the 33%. That will be how much I expect to see my GDP grow from today to tomorrow. Is that correct? Yeah, 33% or 0.33. Oh, 33. Yeah. Do we get it? So 130 multiplied by 0.33, what will I get? Anyone to help me? 130 multiplied by 0.33. 130 multiplied by 0.33.
42.9.
Good. 42.9. So this is how much I expect the GDP to grow, plus the existing value already, 130. So all in all, I expect this current year to be how much? 130 plus 42.9. How much am I going to get?
72.9.
172.9. Or if you want to find it in a very simple manner, it's just going to be 1 plus this, and you just get this right away. That's the first part of it. The question might be, you only know the GDP of the current year. You don't know that of last year. How can you compute that? And I think Jones do a very good job there in trying to tell us what's going on. So what is the GDP for the current year? The nominal GDP, the GDP for the current year. Anyone to help me? The GDP for the current year that we computed.
292? No, sorry. Nominal GDP, real GDP is 292, right?
292, right? Good. It is 292. Now the question here is, what would be the GDP for last year? Okay, so the easiest way to do this is also very simple. If you know GDP grows by 33% every year, use the same approach that we did, right? Do you guys get it? So you now have 292 divided by the value that you expect to see here. And that will be the real GDP for the coming year. Do we get it? Let me use a simple approach. I know that GDP grows by 13%, so 0.33. Multiplied by a certain number, which I don't know. When I do that, I get this current year's GDP, which is 292. Do we get it? So we don't know this guy here. Let's assume that the number that we don't know is A, which is last year's GDP. We don't know. But we know that when you multiply it by the growth rate, we get the current year's value. So what is a simple way to go about this? Just make A the subject. So I have A equals 292 divided by 1.33. So that will give me the GDP for the last year. Do we get it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that would be how to calculate it. Was that Alexis' question? Yeah, good. Yeah. Any approach that you think is consistent, Jane, I think should work. But just let me know first before. So are you? I don't get it.
Are you start with NGDP or real GDP?
If you are in the current year, the real GDP is the same as the previous GDP, correct?
No reply yet.
Yeah. If you are in the current year, the real GDP is the same as your nominal GDP.
Yes, but which to choose to start with?
It depends on the question, right? So if the question is asking you by how much is the GDP going to grow for the next year, you only, if for instance, I'm in year 1 and I would like to predict for year 2, I only know the prices for year 1. So I'm going to use the prices and everything in year 1 in getting the 130. Do you get it? But if I'm in year 2, trying to predict what year 1 was, then I'm going to use year 2's prices, compute year 2's real GDP, then use that one in getting what the previous year was. Yeah.
Okay, he got it.
Sure. So just a quick one. We are done for today. And again, the higher the attendance, the more likely the fact that your finals wouldn't be cumulative. It will just be the one after the midterm. Should anyone be in need of the video, just draw my attention. I can send it to you. But don't send it to colleagues in the class that are not participating in the class. If you do that and the participation is very low, then the whole idea is that I will have to have the final exam cover everything from the first day till the last day. So try and keep away from sharing the videos. If those who are not in class happen to contact me, I'll send them the video and I'll get to know the reason why they are not in class, and I'll get to know how to also set the questions with regards to your midterm and the quizzes. So hopefully I'll see you guys next week. If you want to have office hours for this week, just send me an email. I'll find time and we can go through questions if you have any. See you guys next week. You have your first tutorial next week. Okay.
Okay, thank you. So, Professor?
Yes, Manan?
Yeah, so most of them are leaving, so I can also leave, right?
Yeah, sure, feel free.
Okay, okay. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
See you guys.
See you.